Small screen techniques. This podcast is at the intermediate level. It requires some knowledge of Accordance Bible software, but no knowledge of Hebrew or Greek. Apple's iPad and the MacBook Air, with their smallish displays, have been redefining the mobile computing experience for a lot of people these days. So we thought it'd be a great time to consider some small screen techniques for Accordance. When we're away from our desktop, with their large and sometimes dual displays, how can we make the most efficient use of a small monitor? We're familiar with the problem here at Lighting the Lamp, as we deal with it every week in this podcast. My 27-inch iMac looks great on my desktop and offers some wonderful possibilities for Accordance, but our podcasts are restricted to 1280 by 800. That's really the largest size we can use and still have the lettering visible on the menus when we're viewed on an iPhone. Even the MacBook Air has a slightly larger native resolution at 1366 by 768, but its screen is a mere 11.5 inches, which makes the image itself smaller. Whatever the size of your display, we've got some great tips for you. We'll divide them into two groups: preferences and techniques. Preferences. The first step to optimizing Accordance for a small screen is adjusting a number of preferences. If you use the same laptop to drive a large monitor on your desktop, you may want to consider creating a new user on your computer just for small screen computing. It's better than trying to adjust all these settings each time. Open System Preferences, select Accounts, then click the plus to add a new user account. The preferences you create in Accordance will now apply only to this user. Now we're ready to adjust our Accordance preferences. Under General Preferences, we probably want to limit the number of zones. I usually select 4, which gives me some flexibility without making the zones too small. A smaller text size for the tool browser is usually a good idea too, and we'll certainly want to allow it to auto-size, enlarging when we need it and shrinking when it's not in use. Setting the Instant Details palette to fade when not in use is a great space saver. If we do that, we can probably keep the large font size in it when we are using it. And speaking of font size, there are a number of space-saving settings in the text and tool preferences. Before we adjust them, remember that these are global changes. They apply to every text and every tool in Accordance. If we just want to change a text or two, it's better to use Command-T to adjust the display of an individual text. Whichever method we choose, selecting the smallest readable font size means the greatest amount of text appears in a given space. Select a highly readable font face, like Garamond. Select paragraphs without a space and suppress poetry. Reduce or eliminate leading, the amount of space between lines. In all of these settings, it's important to balance readability and eliminating eye strain with saving space. Happily, most people using small laptops position them much closer to their eyes than they do their desktop monitors, making different settings possible. Techniques. Supporting windows and palettes are nice when we need them, but suck up valuable space when we don't. The two most common offenders are the library window and the resource palette. Consider dismissing them using the keyboard commands Option Command 1 and Option Command 2. Now, use the Expand Radio button to swell the workspace to use that extra space. See how much more room there is to work? Need the library window? Use Option Command 1 to recall it for just as long as you need it. Need the resource palette? Do the same with Option Command 2. The rest of the time, we have the full width of our monitor for our workspace. The second technique is to use tabs, not zones. When we first developed Accordance, the typical monitor was a lot smaller than it is today. Tabs were a neat way to organize windows so that each had the whole display to itself. That same technique works with today's smallest monitors. Then we can use Shift-Command left square bracket and Shift-Command right square bracket to navigate between the tabs. From a very old technique, let's move to one of the newest ones, the Magnify Zone command introduced in Accordance 9.2. If we decide we do want to use zones, the Magnify Zone command, Option Command M, will magnify the front zone. Once it's magnified, Option Command left square bracket and Option Command right square bracket allow us to move from zone to zone easily. Now, let's use a few of these techniques ourselves. in accordance. As you can see, I've implemented a number of the preference changes that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. In particular, you'll notice that I have 4 different zones. Each of them is of a reasonable size, and I can tell you, looking at this laptop from a normal distance, I could work with any of these zones easily. Now, you will notice that I do not have the library window showing, but I can certainly recall it easily with Option Command 1, there it is, and dismiss it just as easily. And the same is true with the resource palette, Option Command 2, and dismiss it. By leaving them off unless I need them, I'm able to save a lot of desktop space. Now let's look at some of the other preferences. First of all, notice the tool auto-sizing here. When I move within this tool, for example, I'll click G and let's just go to this particular article. Notice that when my cursor is within the browser window, it expands. When I move to read the article, it shrinks so that I can see more of that article and read it quite easily. The same, of course, is true down here with BAS Pictures. Here we see the ziggurat and when I move into that picture, I move into the text rather, you can see that it shrinks back. I also have set my instant details to fade. Now watch. I'll put my cursor over Shinar here. I will press the Command key, and you can see that the instant details appears at the bottom when I need it. When I let go of the Command key, it disappears. Now, when we have it set to fade, we can freeze it by holding the Shift key down. In this case, that's also a good tip if I want to resize it. I will click the orientation button, and I'm going to go ahead and drag it by the corner so that it takes up, let's say about that much space. I'll put it over here on this side. Now I'll let the Shift key go, and of course it's going to fade. Now that's really handy because that means I can also save the instant details space. When I need it, it's there, like so, and when I don't need it, it disappears and I can reclaim that space. You'll notice that one of the preferences that I did not change is the font size. Rather, I only changed it in one text. I changed it in the KJV over here. Now, I can't imagine that you're going to be able to read that on whatever size screen you're looking at this podcast on, but I will tell you I can read it easily from this distance on my laptop. However, I've set all of these texts individually at the appropriate size so that you can see them in the podcast, and I really didn't want to change them all just for one podcast. So let me show you another little technique, and that is, you probably already know that we can click the individual icons here, the font icons, and change the size. Did you know that if we press the Option key, that we change all of the font sizes in the zone at once? So if you only want to change a couple, there's a handy tip for you. But notice the difference between the KJV size here. I can see more than 2 verses. I can almost see 3 verses, whereas here in the ESV, I can't even see an entire verse, and this is the size at which I usually read my texts. So I've limited the zones to 4. I have set my instant details to auto fade. I've set my tool browser window to auto size, and of course you can do whatever you'd like with the font settings. Plus, I have hidden my library and I have hidden my resource palette. Now, using Option Command M, I can magnify any one of these zones and work with it quite easily. Let's say, for example, that, here I am in Genesis 11. And let's say that I want to do a search for the city of Babel. Well, I can do it quite easily. I'll use the contextual menu, and I can say, well, I'd like to look up that word. Turns out it only appears twice in Genesis. And notice that Accordance has automatically placed it in another tab. Now, if I want to search for a more common word, let's say I want to search for the word, let's say speech. Once again, it adds a tab. And by the way, if I want to take this and I want to amplify it, let's say, to the resource palette, I'll press Option Command 2, and I can choose any item in the resource palette. I'm going to choose the Anchor Bible Dictionary, and there you can see I've got 6 hits, and I can actually page through the marks as I want. Then use Option Command 2 and dismiss the resource palette. I can also use Option Command left square bracket and Option Command right square bracket to navigate through the various zones. Once I'm done, I simply hit Option-Command-M, and I'm back to the regular number of zones, or I'm back to the regular view of zones. Now, the other option that we have is to transform our individual zones into tabs. How do we do that? We grab a hold of the title bar here, and you can see when I move it up here, there's the option for moving the zone. You can tell by that gray shaded area. But if I move it into the tabs, do you see this little thing right here that says Add Tab? There, I just transformed a zone into a tab. I'll do it again for you. I'll grab this one, I'll move it up here. See, it says Add Tab. Now I have all of these tabs available. And by the way, if I take one more of these tabs, let's eliminate anchor and we'll just do it with the Erdman's Dictionary of the Bible. Now you can see I have these various tabs. They occupy the same amount of space as the magnified zone does, and I can click through them, or in the same way that I navigated through zones, I can use Shift-Command left square bracket and right square bracket to shift through the various tabs. So the choice is yours, zones, tabs, or even a combination of the two. Whatever preferences you choose, these are some nice tips to make that small screen work efficiently with Accordance for you. As we've just seen, small monitors are no impediment to effective Bible study, at least not with Accordance 9. Whether you're traveling on business, relaxing in the recliner with your laptop, or just enamored with Apple's latest MacBook Air, I trust this week's tips will prove useful. This has been Dr. J for Accordance Bible Software. Thank you for watching this episode of Lighting the Lamp.